Y'all, I really did not want to make this video because it's going to get me in trouble. Probably worse than the time I told a group of immigrant Muslim leaders that they don't spend enough time with or respect the opinions of the domestic African American Muslim community. That was a doozy. But y'all, today we're talking about terrorism and terrorist incidents. And we're talking about it from the vantage point of how too often American Muslims will suspend their critical thinking and their strategic thinking in light of emotional thinking and how that harms our cause. It harms liberty in the United States. It harms preventing actual terrorist attacks, and it actually hurts our community's reputation. But before I go any further, I need y'all to know that I know that the American government has and does regularly lie to us. So here are some of the greatest hits from our government and their lies.
I cannot tell you everything that we know, but what I can share with you, when combined with what all of us have learned over the years, is deeply troubling. What you will see is an accumulation of facts and disturbing patterns of behavior. The facts in Iraq's behavior demonstrate that Saddam Hussein and his regime have made no effort to disarm as required by the international community. Indeed, the facts in Iraq's behavior show that Saddam Hussein and his regime are concealing their efforts to produce more weapons of mass destruction.
When someone at the White House leaked a story to Washington Post assistant managing editor Bob Woodward. The story, about 3 months after the invasion, suggested that the president had decided to attack Iraq after Tennant told him the evidence for weapons of mass destruction was, quote, a slam dunk.
I never really thought that I would see and have confirmed pictures of terrorists beheading children.
Now, according to the Washington Post, a White House spokesperson later clarified that United States officials and the president have not seen pictures or videos of beheaded children or seen reports independently confirming that.
And just this morning, CNN reported that Israel cannot confirm the specific claim that babies were beheaded in a Hamas attack, according to officials contradicting previous public statements.
Guys, this is such a crucial topic because I don't think we understand the gravity of the situation we're in today. That first clip that I showed was the justification for the war in Iraq. And it was in the aftermath of September 11th and those terrorist attacks, and how the government used the lie of weapons of mass destruction to cause so much death and destruction for years and years afterwards. And then, of course, the propaganda coming out of the White House to justify unmitigated military aid to Israel to then commit the genocide happening in Gaza. We live in a post-truth society. That is a fact. However, what's also a fact is that we often don't recognize we live in a neo-Jahiliyyah, which means the modern day of ignorance. Jahiliyyah is the time for non-Muslims that before Islam came and the society was incredibly corrupt, injustice was everywhere, and Islam addressed so much of that. Now, I do want to recognize that this message coming from me might be a bit of a pill for a lot of y'all to swallow, especially because I don't have an ounce of white guilt in my body. I've always used throughout my entire career the privilege I have to uplift marginalized people and, for the most part, take a back seat as a PR advisor to have people in front of the camera doing the heavy lifting because they should have their voices front and center. And to the point where actually all my friends and colleagues who are in activism from the Muslim community call me the daywalker, the vampire who can go out in the sun. It's because, no one knows I'm Muslim unless I tell them or they've seen me, under activism like that. And on purpose today, I'm wearing my FBI Citizens Academy pin. You can see it right here. The reason I'm wearing that is because I want to get a few things out of the way right off the bat. First and foremost, there's a big difference between working for law enforcement and working with law enforcement, being pro-engagement with law enforcement and being pro-law enforcement. I take the stance that American civil liberties are the thing that makes America great and that are the fault line that we have to preserve today, right now, especially with the Trump administration trying to destroy them. I also say, and this is abundantly clear, and no one can argue this, if there is a hate crime, if there is something happening against you and your community, it's going to be law enforcement that responds. So whether you distrust, hate, like, love, or any other part of the spectrum with law enforcement, engagement is a must. And the difference between working with and working for is crucial. Me, as a civil libertarian, I care about the First Amendment, I care about the Bill of Rights, but I also care about our community's safety and being practical. That said, I want to start talking about a few things that are key for this whole video for us to understand. First and foremost, we need to know the difference between a Psy-op and a conspiracy theory. because conspiratorial thinking, I think, is at the root of our community's problems when it comes to this issue. But psyops are a whole different thing. Let's get to some definitions. Psychological operations is what psyops means. They are operations to convey selected information and indicators to audiences to influence their motives and objective reasoning. Essentially, a psyop can be done by all kinds of groups. It could be done by government. It could be done by lobbyist groups. It can be done by political parties and has been done in recent times on all of those things. I think psyops are important and we have to recognize them. They are different, though, than conspiratorial thinking and conspiracy theories. And yes, I know some conspiracy theories have played out to be true, but that doesn't mean they all are. And that doesn't mean that we embrace conspiracy thinking the first time something happens, especially in the early moments in the aftermath of something horrible. A conspiracy theory, just to get a definition down so that we all are on the same page. A conspiracy theory is an explanation for an event or situation that asserts the existence of a plot when other explanations are more probable, especially when the blame is directed at a targeted community. Guys, one of the things about conspiracy theories that I think we should remember, and this is the tie directly to emotional thinking. Now, don't just take my word for it. An expert on this, Naomi Klein, who wrote a book called Doppelganger that gets into the mentality around conspiratorial thinking, she said conspiracy theories often get the facts wrong, but the emotions right. And this is why it's so important to remember our identity and our affiliation as humans to fall into tribalism and in-group, out-group dynamics, especially in times of crisis. So being a victim of a conspiracy theory isn't something necessarily to be ashamed of, but if it's your default setting, it's something you have to be aware of so that you can change. Because at the end of the day, there are harsh realities of things that we have to deal with, whether we think it's a conspiracy, a psyop, or something else. Now, to me, what the problem is with conspiracy theory is it's like people that you see who are always complaining. People that you see like that, just think of someone that you've seen like maybe every couple of years, and they're always complaining, woe is me, my life is terrible. Rarely, if ever, do you see them improve their lives. And that's how I see conspiracy theories. Very often, they are a distraction that leads you down a rabbit hole that leads you away from making progress. Now, before we get into too much more serious issues, I did want to show the difference between responsible journalism and irresponsible journalism. And I want to start by kind of lightening the mood with who I think is one of the sages in the media of our time, Jon Stewart, and how he covered the New Orleans attack. Let's go.
In the immediate aftermath of these terrible events, we all wait to see whose worldview will be validated.
See, he gets it already. Two things here that you should be aware of. First and foremost, he's talking about worldviews being validated. Secondly, he has both of the attackers, who are obviously of different races, right next to each other, treating them equally. This is the way it should be done.
And it makes it doubly frustrating that the FBI feels the need to play into the demand for immediate answers when they couldn't possibly know them yet.
Now, I want you to pay attention to this clip because I have personally worked for governments, worked with NGOs that have to be a part of, and in the capacity of all of those, preparation for or in real emergency management situations. And what you're going to see repeatedly throughout today's video is that in emergency management situations, you have a collection of people, from bureaucrats, from elected officials to emergency managers to nonprofits to civic society groups, all with competing interests. And that all leads to a breakdown in messaging from the authorities, which is one of the reasons why people have so much distrust and we live in this post-truth society. However, this is inexcusable, what Jon is about to expose.
I give you the FBI 4 hours after the attack.
This is not a terrorist event.
Just say you don't know yet. Because a couple of hours later, when you find out what's really going on, you're just going to look dumb.
The FBI, we are working with our partners to investigate this as an act of terrorism.
Now, before Jon goes further, one of the things I do need to point out is the backlash to this person in her press conferences wasn't about the flip-flop or getting it initially wrong. Surprisingly, or maybe unsurprisingly, now that we're seeing who the MAGA supporters are and what they care about the most, it was calling this a DEI hire and calling her unqualified because of her race. Disgusting, y'all.
Okay. No harm, no foul. It's not like you played into the fears of co-conspirators out there lining the streets with explosives.
We do not believe that Jabbar was solely responsible.
The FBI has recovered video, surveillance video, that appears to show three men and one woman appearing to help put IEDs, what are believed to be IEDs, at locations in the French Quarter.
Now, this is so important because one of the things that all of us should know, and you'll see this reflected in some comments from social media that I'm going to point out later, is that in the early days of a crisis or any kind of thing like a terrorist attack or even a hurricane or other crisis response, is it's almost impossible to rely on your initial assessments. That's why he was saying, just say you don't know, say you're investigating, because then you won't erode the trust. This is an amazing example of that because look what John is about to expose.
Holy shit, IEDs in the French Quarter. I guess I have no option but to violently confront anyone in the vicinity that I believe is operating a sleeper cell.
Police interviewed those 4 individuals and now believe that they just were bystanders who happened to look suspicious.
But I already killed them.
If it wasn't for the sound, I would have thought my stream paused because of John's comedic brilliance.
Look, they happen to look suspicious in New Orleans? Oh, what were they wearing, beads in the winter? Little sparkle and glitter? What were they carrying around, musical instruments and seemingly too upbeat for a funeral?
It turns out those were just patrons on the street that were looking inside the coolers.
Yes, nothing more suspicious than people on Bourbon Street at 3 in the morning looking inside coolers. I also arrested some ladies who were lifting up their shirts, clearly signaling to the other jihadists. These attacks are really frightening and add to this feeling of societal tenuousness that we.
I need to stop here because, guys, John is about to get into something that's real, and he's also about to get it very wrong. Look, I've used this meme myself hundreds of times, and it's because it is so effective at pointing out society's double standards. Now, Americans have been conditioned since before I was born to mistrust Arabs and brown people. Not even talking about the issue of slavery and all of the different things of bigotry that are part of American society. What I'm pointing out here, though, is just because there's a double standard in the media narrative, and just because it is true that if a mass shooter happens to be black or brown, they're immediately going to go to terrorist or something like that. And if it happens to be a white person who does it, they are immediately going to start putting on the kid gloves, talking about mental health. We're going to get into that with one of the social media comments that I need to respond to as well. But guys, that doesn't mean that we turn off our brains and don't look at the facts. So I want to show you the rest of Jon Stewart's video because he gets something crucial and wrong here, and I need to point it out, and then we'll talk about the social media post on this too.
All been ingesting since, I'm going to go with the creation of Facebook. Almost more frightening is that we can't place these attackers into the normal, neat boxes of disturbed, bullied loners. Not only do they not fit into neat ideological packages, they almost seem uncomfortably normal.
That's the problem right there. There is no normal, neat ideological box for a terrorist. And when you expect that, you're actually, whether you know it or not, reinforcing exactly the opposite of what that meme was sent. You're saying that there's limited amounts of things that happen. Behavioral, true, but every person who gets radicalized has unique triggers and has unique issues that led them to that. Now, I will point out in the future how American Muslims or Western Muslims who've been radicalized by international or foreign national groups that are terrorist organizations ran by Muslims have several things in common that actually happens a lot. But what I want to point out here is that because there is no definition or normal thing of what a terrorist is, that's how you end up doing the opposite of what John's doing here, where you have both of these people being treated the same. That's a huge problem, and we need to fix that.
ISIS supporting Jabbar? This is him from a while back.
I'm Shamsuddin Jabbar, property manager with Blue Meadow Properties and team lead at the Midas Group at Core Realty. I just want to say hello and let you know a little bit about me. So I'm born and raised in Beaumont, Texas, and now live in Houston.
Here's the crazy thing. He's the terrorist. I'd have bought real estate from this guy.
Guys, we got to get into something a little bit more serious. And this is where I want to talk about a article that I wrote about 4 years ago and that I posted it on New Year's Day, hours after the terrorist attack. Guys, I posted this article called 4 Things When Condemning people doing terrible things. So 4 thoughts on condemning people doing terrible things. This is at muslimmatters.org. You can read it now. Now, I'm not going to read the article to you, but I just want to make the point. The key of the article is to say, when someone comes at me with this question of, don't you condemn this or do you condemn that, like Piers Morgan always does whenever he talks about Gaza and Israel, um, I always immediately think that what people say often is more of a reflection of who they are and what they would do than it is the question they're asking me. And it makes me wonder, of course I condemn that horrible thing. Don't you? If it was someone from your tribe, would you condemn it? Because you're asking me like I don't. You see the point here? Here's what I wrote in the beginning of the social media post, and we're going to get to a person whom I've known for decades and used to highly respect and is highly, highly educated. He should know better if he wasn't a victim of emotional thinking. This is, again, hours after the terrorist attack in New Orleans. This is an article I wrote many years ago, and it is relevant today. I have to say that I hate that the new year started with a terrorist attack. I hate that the person who committed the terrorist attack was a radicalized individual who made a point to show support for Daesh, aka ISIS, and that this will lead to people distrusting their fellow Americans who are practicing Muslims. Now, there's a lot I did there to make sure that we don't conflate Islam with the actions of Muslims. I mean, if any religion in the world that this should be, its practitioners are mindful of that, it should be Muslims because we have one name for the religion and a different name for the followers. It's part of our theology to try to live up to Islam and not to blame the religion for the shortcomings of the worst people trying to follow it or claiming to follow it. And I can't emphasize this enough because I find it incredibly ironic and pretty idiotic that our community chose Islamophobia to address anti Muslim bias and hate because we do the opposite of what our theology and what our religion is telling us. We have to aspire to live up to the values of Islam, and we should be condemning the people who violate that more than anything else. And then on top of that, we should also be mindful never to put the blame on our faith for when people try to corrupt the religion or try to act in horrible ways. Now, I want to get into the reply from this guy. He literally wrote to me, was he a terrorist or mentally disturbed? Think back of that meme I posted a second ago. Why is terrorism and mentally disturbed defined by skin color? It shouldn't be, and that's my point. He had no connection to any group. Yeah, he pledged support for Daesh and he flew their flag. He acted alone and wanted first to kill his family. It is obvious, and then in parentheses, if we do not use skin color as a factor, that he has serious mental issues. It is totally unacceptable to talk about terrorism in this case. Really? Totally unacceptable? We got to talk a little bit about this issue of mental health. Guys, look, it's easy to say that anyone who does something violent and horrible has mental health issues and is disturbed, obviously. But someone who does a terrorist attack, it depends on how you try to understand and define mental issues or mentally disturbed. Because I'll tell you, some of these guys in their manifestos, they are cold and calculated, and you would think that they are using logic to get to the places they are. As flawed and toxic as that logic is, they are not necessarily crazy. Mentally disturbed, sure. But this is another thing where we turn off our critical thinking and go into emotional mode because we don't want to be affiliated with people who do horrible things. And that's natural. But guys, I need to show how not only are we falling into the trap of emotional thinking, but how even our elected officials, at the worst time possible, are using terrible events to push their own narratives, and how this is not unique to the Muslim community. Let's go.
Can I say something right quick? Tell me who you're with.
WDSU.
WDSU. Okay, and CBS.
NBC's over here on the right.
Oh, that's an unusual position.
I don't get it.
You wouldn't. Look, the FBI is not going to be able to answer those questions, okay?
Guys, this is such an important clip because I want you to realize how this cat is literally using a tragedy to score political points and talk against the media hours after a terrorist attack in his state. So instead of showing empathy to the victims, instead of trying to reinforce law enforcement, he's actually speaking for law enforcement as a senator instead of a law enforcement agent. He doesn't know what he's talking about, and he's out there chasing the camera for his own selfish ends. People do this all the time. And in fact, the Obama administration took a Chinese proverb and said, never let a crisis go to waste. I want us to get beyond that because we have to look at the facts on the ground and then start to analyze how we respond to things. So without further ado, I want to get back into the video and show one of the videos I think that's most responsible for conspiratorial thinking in the New Orleans terrorist attack. And it is a psyop, in my opinion, because the reporter is definitely biased and the report is definitely biased. But there's a lot of things that we can debunk based on that video as we go through it. So let's get into it.
We are here inside the New Orleans terrorist home. You can see that it's been clearly destroyed, the door at least.
Now you're going to notice her as she does this report backtrack things she say that are sensational. So she said clearly destroyed and then the door at least. She does that throughout the video. Look for that.
From the FBI raid yesterday, but if we walk through the home, we see some signs of what he was up to. He had this work area here, lots of different chemicals splayed around, and different electronics. This is, again, a work setup. Left receipts, just very unkempt in here. If we go over here, actually, you can see the Department of Justice documents here, the search warrant, and the property that they recorded here.
Now, this is the key to the first major point I want to make. Everybody got distracted by the stupid can opener that was left out. Look, people leave in a hurry, people do stuff. And from what I saw, this reporter actually, funny enough, threw law enforcement and the FBI specifically under the bus because she was there before law enforcement raided the place, and then she had access to the dwelling immediately after. And this is one of the things that's leading people to this huge conspiracy theory. Well, first and foremost, it's not an active crime scene if they've left the receipt and the search warrant there. They got what they needed, they left. It's no longer an active crime scene. And all y'all should know better, especially you pundits out there acting like experts. On top of all of that, not only that, but it's so easy for a reporter with a major paper like the New York Post to be there before law enforcement. If you know the attacker's name and you have access to any type of people research database, which there's tons of them, you could find out where he lives. And in fact, when I said she threw law enforcement under the bus, she got to the dwelling before and then shot a video saying, we were here before the FBI raid. Right. So this is acting like she's faster than the Bureau. That's not at all unfeasible to happen. On top of all of that, she's not necessarily doing anything unprecedented. If you remember the San Bernardino attack, the media got to go through their dwelling in the day after I think the attack happened as well. All it takes now, she could be trespassing. But all it would take for her to walk through this place this early is either permission from the renters or the landlord. If she didn't get that, she might be trespassing. But if the landlord, gave her permission, she could have paid for that, to have access to the dwelling for her story. That is something that's not unusual. What is unusual is the way she covers it, and we're going to explore her background in just a minute.
Which seems to be a lot of chemicals. Again, just left in disarray. There's a bedroom back here. And what appears to be his collection of religious materials, his Qurans, an open Quran.
So the open Quran is something that is odd. It's odd because Muslims don't just leave the Quran open like that. When we read it. Then if we want to pick up where we left off, we mark it off and, with a bookmark or something, and then we close it because we respect the Quran and we want its pages and the text to be preserved and to be kept clean. Now, while this looks weird, if the FBI was looking for him to have had any kind of indication or support for the videos they say they have of him pledging allegiance to Daesh, it could be that he said something, a verse from the Quran, and they looked for it to see if he left any notes or had fingerprints or any other kinds of things. So it very well could be an FBI agent as part of the warrant searching the Quran for something that they're looking for their investigation, and they could have left it up there. Still, and This video for me is way too blurry. I couldn't make it out. I have seen reports that it's open on a verse that's often misinterpreted and abused by radicals trying to incite violence inappropriately, but I can't tell from here. The video is too blurry for me. My point, though, still stands. The house was raided by FBI agents. Things probably weren't left as they were when he was there.
With the passage there, as well as even the Bible here, but mostly books on Islam.
So that's actually my first clue into not only is she trying to be sensational, but she has a narrative she's building. She said, even the Bible here, but mostly books on Islam. So she's trying to reinforce the narrative of terrorism and Islam together for a purpose. And we have to be very mindful of that narrative and break it. Again, why the term Islamophobia is counterproductive.
And his prayer rug just to the left of me here. And if we go back, there's another bedroom here. You can see he left all these belongings, contact lenses, personal belongings, his bathroom. This seems to be some sort of workspace, again, with other chemicals here. The light's still on. Some kind of station set up here. We're not really sure what that was for. In, what we can assume was also a bedroom. You can see clothes left here.
Now, this is something that commentators who are pushing conspiracies didn't touch on, but I want us not to miss it. The cameraman focuses in on the kafaya, clearly a symbol of unity with Palestinians or against the genocide in Gaza. So they're trying to push this visually to associate support with Gaza with terrorism. That's something that, if we look into who Jenny Terror is actually very clear. And this does, in my opinion, qualify as a Psy-op. But a government Psy-op, not necessarily. Jenny Terror works for the New York Post. So why would she be in Texas? First off, she stays in Texas most of the time because her beat is immigration. And the New York Post is right-wing and is often trying to sell this narrative that immigration is terrible for America and a threat to white people. And her stories on immigration, just watch a couple of them. They are all sensational, and they're always trying to act like it's nothing but criminals and dangerous thugs crossing the border, when the opposite is true. Even the Heritage Foundation found that undocumented people in the U.S. commit crimes far less than native populations. But the other thing is, not only is Jenny Terror someone who has put repeated posts on her social media that she is an extreme and pro-Israeli actor, she got her start in the media as a production intern for the Laura Ingraham show. Laura Ingraham, for those who don't know, is a Fox News host who was particularly vicious in the days and years after September 11th on trying to demonize and stir up anti-Muslim sentiment. And then on top of that, Jenny Terror also, as a student, worked with, she was actually the recruitment head for what's called Prager Force. Now, Dennis Prager is an online pundit who is extremely right-wing, also extremely pro-Zionist, and I'm talking about the kind of Zionist that Israel can do no wrong, and wants to support not only never stopping military aid to Israel, but increasing it. And she was the head of recruitment for students to take classes at what's called PragerU, his online propaganda outfit called a university. On top of all of that, she was the AIPAC representative to a high school summit. And again, I point all this out so you know that she is not an unbiased reporter. She's not out just getting the facts. She's out to be first. She's out to sensationalize, and she's out with an agenda. Now, we're going to get back to the video because there's a few more things that will show the contrast between her style of reporting, which I think is full of propaganda, another word for a psyop, and then responsible reporting, which I think we have to know the difference for. So let's go.
And just a sign that someone was here up until those last few moments when neighbors said he left just before the New Year's holiday, saying he was done with his lease, it was up, and he was on his way to New Orleans where he would live there. Didn't take any furniture because he said his new home would be furnished. That's all we know so far.
Now, we're about to get into a story from a Houston-based reporter who I know named Jeremy Rogowski, who is very responsible. Let's check the difference.
The FBI says the Bourbon Street attacker was, quote, 100% inspired by ISIS. But how did Jabbar go from homegrown Texan to radicalized terrorist? Investigative reporter Jeremy Rogowski spent the day digging into his background and continues our team coverage now. Jeremy.
Well, Mia, Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry says getting answers to questions like that is like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle with 1,000 pieces.
You've got to start sifting through those pieces.
That's the task ahead as investigators unravel the life of Shamsuddin Jabbar, From the terror on Bourbon Street to his childhood in Beaumont,
I'm just shocked.
where a high school classmate remembered him as well-spoken and smart.
I mean, you just wouldn't think that he would do something like this.
This is not how we knew Shamsuddin.
A friend of the family, also floored by the news.
I'd love to get my hands on whoever influenced him.
After high school, records show Jabbar married and divorced 3 times, had at least 3 children, and served in the Army from 2007 to 2020, leaving as a staff sergeant.
Now, this is so important that we don't overlook this, guys, because one of the things that I've been trying to drill home is, and I said earlier, there is not a typical regular box to talk about radicalized people. However, anyone who's paid any attention at all to Western Muslims who have been radicalized will see that there's a lot of things in common. That number one, more often than not, they're not great practicing Muslims. And in fact, that's a fact that you should take advantage of because they're also often detached from the Muslim community. Now, this video shows that he was known by some people in the community, but it doesn't show that he was a regular mosque attendee or anything like that. And more often than not, it's actually the organized mosque attending and religious Muslim community that turns people in when they hear radical stuff that happens. And a lot of the times, it's even the own families who turn people in so that they can avoid, number one, a terrorist attack from happening. And then number two, try to get their loved one help so that their lives aren't ruined and they don't kill other people and have to deal with that on the day of judgment. So another thing that was brought out in that clip was married and divorced 3 times. This is not uncommon. Most of the time, Westerners who get lured and seduced by the toxic call of Daesh or Al Qaeda or any of these groups generally have chaotic lives that are at incredible low points, and they're looking for quick fixes and easy way out. Often they have substance abuse issues, and this guy was arrested for a DUI in the past. They often have, like I said, marital problems or sexual identity issues or just identity issues overall, and definitely relationship issues. So none of this is uncommon with people who have been radicalized. But why do I make such a point of this? I make such a point of this because you often have people who do ridiculous things and say ridiculous things as a kind of response to what's going on. Now, I want to get into this because this goes back to this whole idea of, was he mentally disturbed, and how do we respond, especially in the initial hours of a terrorist attack? This guy, I'm not going to put his name, or I'm not going to put what social media platform he wrote it on. It's really disturbing. He goes, disappointed in the Islamic Society of Greater Houston. Stop apologizing for our faith, exclamation point. We don't see any other religious group starting to apologize like this. And then here's the key. And without all the facts being out, please stop. What is he referring to? A press release the day after the terrorist attack from the Islamic Society of Greater Houston. Now, I do have to make a disclaimer. Yes, I am a public relations practitioner and consultant. Had nothing to do with this press release. And I need to say that because I was ISGH's first ever executive director years ago. Now, this press release reads like this, and I will tell you up front, it's a little bit verbose. I think it's a situation where less would have been more. I think they go a little over the top with the language, but in no way are they apologizing for their faith. Press release, New Orleans terror attack, Thursday, January 2nd, 2025. The Islamic Society of Greater Houston is horrified by the senseless crime targeting civilians in New Orleans, which has resulted in many casualties and injuries. This act of terror and pure evil has no place in our community and society. ISGH extends condolences to the families of those killed in the horrific and infuriating Bourbon Street attack. We pray for the speedy and full recovery of all injured and impacted by this heinous crime. ISGH has a long-standing absolute zero tolerance policy against extremism and suspicious activities. ISGH encourages anyone with any relevant information to come forward and duly report to law enforcement. This is important for a second later. ISGH is in contact with the authorities, and relevant law enforcement agencies are accorded the fullest cooperation needed. Now, those 2 sentences are so important. They called for everyone to come forward and cooperate in the investigation, and then they said they were working with law enforcement on a needed basis, only the fullest cooperation needed. This immediately, Muslims thinking emotionally are throwing ISGH under the bus, saying incredible things about them. And on top of that, that's all while ISGH sent, the local center sent to that community where this person lived, a warning saying you should work with law enforcement and don't talk to the media unless you have representation. And then they sent everyone to the Council on American Islamic Relations to make sure their civil liberties are handled and protected. Now, another disclaimer, I was the founding executive director of CARE in Houston. Again, I had nothing to do with this. It's been over a decade since I've lived in Houston. My point still stands, though. ISGH encouraged people to cooperate with law enforcement because that's what a responsible community would do to help get the facts out. And they also went out of their way to protect civil liberties. So what I don't understand is how in any way is this apologizing for our faith? I don't get this guy. I think it's ridiculous what he said. And I want to get back to the video because you're about to see some really interesting things come forward as how this video wraps up. Let's go.
Jabbar, property manager with Blue Metal Properties.
The same year, Jabbar posted this YouTube video about a real estate career in Houston, a business he later reported a $28,000 loss, along with past due house payments of $27,000 he listed in divorce proceedings. In 2022, his wife accused Jabbar of excessive cash withdrawals, gifts to paramours, and unreasonable spending.
Now, I had to look it up. A paramour is literally a side piece. So again, remember what I said? Financial problems, relationship problems, you know, things that just don't align with being a good practicing Muslim. The crazy thing here, though, is a lot of people took this to say this is a conspiracy. This can't be real. He wasn't a Muslim. They're questioning his conversion and all that stuff. When the video clearly shows people from the community who knew him, and then on top of that, that he did have a Daesh flag with him. If he flew it upside down, yeah, then actually it's probably because maybe he can't really read Arabic. Who knows? All I know is that the evidence supports that he was a terrorist, and for us to claim otherwise or use this narrative of like he wasn't a practicing Muslim, it sends the exact opposite message that you want people to hear. What you want people to focus on is that he was a horrible Muslim and what he did was tremendously evil and should be condemned. That's not apologizing for our faith, that's standing up for our faith. I want to let the video go because there's a few more things we need to
Months
point
later,
out.
records show he was evicted from an apartment in Cyprus.
We are looking in everything in his life.
The FBI executed a search warrant at Jabbar's latest home in North Harris County. Investigators have not yet reported what they found inside or whether any of those pieces will help solve the puzzle of how this native Texan and Army veteran pledged allegiance to the Islamic State.
That's the stuff in the coming days as far as that path to radicalization that we're really going to be digging into and making a priority.
Now, the FBI did say that Jabbar claimed he joined ISIS before last summer, saying so in one of 5 Facebook videos investigators say he posted while driving from Texas to New Orleans New Year's Eve night. Mia and Tracy.
With the background, Jeremy Rogowski, thank you.
This is so important here, guys, because not only did they claim that he posted all these videos of him pledging allegiance to Daesh, one of the things that I'm disappointed with law enforcement is they haven't released those videos. So that leaves more reason for people to distrust the official narrative. That is a problem, y'all. It's a problem because it doesn't help, right? Just like conspiracy theories don't help, and just like relying on, like things like racial politics don't help, it leads people down these conspiracy theories. And one of the things that's so interesting here is that we need to be very careful in the narratives we put out. Communication is an act of surrender. Once you hit post, what you said, it's out there, and it's only going to be interpreted by how people with their own experience and their own lens and their own biases will interpret it. So even if you have a good motive, indulging in conspiracy theory thinking, bro, you're not Morpheus. Let it go. When the facts are there, take your time to get the facts first and don't go down that. Because for every conspiracy theory you put out there, there's a potential Neo out there that's going to believe it. And you know what that does? That further puts someone away from society, not trusting what's really before their eyes, more into neo-Jahiliyyah and the post-truth society, and it actually makes them more susceptible to radicalization. It's a ridiculous thing that we should stop. It's not what we need as a community. Now, I do want to change it just from does it help to where we should have put our attention on in the days after this attack.
The FBI is working backwards from the night of the New Orleans attack, learning more about the man behind the wheel, former U.S. soldier Shamsa Din Jabbar.
We have a clearer picture today than we did even 2 days ago.
Investigators tracked many of Jabbar's movements before he planted IEDs in coolers on Bourbon Street, then drove into New Year's crowds. And the path includes Canada.
Jabbar traveled to Cairo, Egypt from June 22nd until July 3rd.
I could tell you why this is important and why they're focusing on foreign travel. This is because if he is not just by pledging, but actually affiliated with foreign terrorist organizations, it opens up more tools that investigators can use to find out what's happening and find out if he's part of a larger network and if there's other threats. One of the things that I wanted to focus on when it comes to working with as opposed to working for law enforcement, one of the ways you can tell an agent that actually cares about the mission rather than trying to advance his own career is if he's committed or she is committed to trying to prevent things from blowing up, right? To prevent terrorist attacks. Let's not get into blowback because that's a whole nother thing. I want us to focus on this case so we can keep getting lessons learned.
Of 2023. A few days later, he flew to Ontario, Canada on July 10th and returned to the U.S. on July 13th.
The RCMP confirmed with CBC News it's working with security partners, including U.S. authorities, as part of this case. And Canada's public safety minister confirms Jabbar traveled from his home state of Texas to Canada for 4 days in July 2023.
Was this individual visiting anyone? Was this individual in contact with individuals that we should then be aware of? But I think it's a little early to, completely ring all the alarm bells at once, simply because we just don't know.
The FBI also released videos taken by Jabbar wearing Meta glasses, riding a bike through New Orleans months before this attack.
So here's evidence that he cased the place, that he was trying to make his attack more effective and harm more people. But I want to shout out the Canadian security expert who was talking about not ringing all the alarm bells and waiting for the facts. That's the theme that I want us all to get through our heads and to start doing so we don't waste our time, waste our effort, and then send the wrong messaging to our fellow Americans and neighbors.
Police say he visited the city in October and again in November. Officials previously said Jabbar proclaimed his support for ISIS in online videos hours before he struck.
Now, it's 2 months, over 2 months since this attack happened. Why we still haven't seen those videos, there might be an investigatory reason for it, but I would say the benefit of releasing them is greater than, holding them back so that people know for sure that he actually was motivated by being radicalized and trying to enact and successfully, unfortunately, enact death and destruction upon innocent people.
They still think he acted alone.
During these past few years, lone actors or small cells of individuals who typically radicalize to violence online and who primarily use easily accessible weapons have posed the greatest terrorism threat to our homeland.
This is so important, y'all, because I want you to understand the society that we live in right now. Tulsi Gabbard, who passed the committee hearing, but has yet, to my knowledge, yet passed the Senate vote to be confirmed, literally told a senator that from her vantage point, now she's going to be the head of all intelligence services in the United States if Trump has his way, which so far he's been very successful in getting his nominees through. She said to another senator when questioned what the biggest threat happening to America would be and to the United States would be. And she said, foreign nationalist terrorist organizations. She used the word Islamic. I like to say foreign terrorist organizations that are led by people claiming to be Muslims. But the point here is that this means that the environment we're operating in is exactly like, but probably much, much worse than post 9/11 America when it comes to civil liberties and civil rights. And this also means that we have to anticipate and expect that there could be more attacks as things get worse. That's why I said a second ago, I didn't want to get into the theory of blowback, because as foreign policy heats up, as things happen due to Trump's decisions, there is a high propensity that there could be more attacks. And as a Muslim community, We can't rely on conspiracy theories to keep us safe because I don't care who you are or what your impressions are about law enforcement. If a hate crime attacks, it's going to be law enforcement that responds. And if you're under investigation, that's also going to be law enforcement. We have to start thinking strategically and nuanced, and we have to do our duty as citizens while protecting our civil liberties. So I wanted to kind of just get to a point real quickly where we go through some definitions because it is incredibly important that we know some things about what's happening. Now, the general definition of terrorism, and this is hearkening back to that guy who said it's completely unacceptable to call it terrorism because the guy was dark skinned. The definition of terrorism, just overall, is to use violence against non-combatants or civilians to achieve political or ideological goals. Now, earlier I had talked about how terrorism and people working terrorist cases prefer working international terrorism because it opens up more tools. This is part of being a civil libertarian and protecting civil liberties. The FBI uses two definitions of terrorism primarily. The government has a ton, and a lot of that is to free their reign in order to be able to very often harm and trample on people's civil liberties, but also to be more effective in how they do their investigations. The two basic definitions that differentiate between international and domestic are as follows. International terrorism, violent criminal acts committed by individuals or groups who are inspired by or associated with designated foreign terrorist organizations or nations, and then parentheses, state sponsored. This is why Trump adding the Houthis back to the terrorism list is so significant. Domestic terrorism, violent criminal acts committed by individuals and or groups to further ideological goals stemming from domestic influences, such as those of a political, religious, social, racial, or environmental nature. Now, the important thing here to think about is that one of the few things that I think Biden did well was after this terrorist attack, he actually reiterated that the intelligence agencies tell him that domestic terrorism, especially white nationalism, is the greatest threat to the homeland. But now, under the new Trump administration, you're hearing the exactly opposite coming from both Tulsi Gabbard and others. So, what does all this mean? What I'm trying to get you guys to understand that is if we are in any way not at the table, then we're likely on the menu. And we have to pay attention because engagement with law enforcement really at this point isn't optional. We need to learn our rights, especially with ICE raids happening. We need to exercise our rights, and we need to rise up to our values of a community and not think emotionally when tragedy happens, but think strategically and think about the long-term impacts. And when I said earlier where our attention should have been in the days and weeks after this attack, our video is going to conclude with that. Let's go.
And tonight we are remembering the numerous families like you just saw there and friends of the victims who lost their lives on New Year's morning.
Yeah, Meg Ferris found out about one more of those victims from Baton Rouge, and she's joining us live from the French Quarter herself with the latest on that. Meg.
Yes, Katie and Charisse, just hours ago, the tight-knit Episcopal school community of Baton Rouge all came together for the funeral of Kareem Badawi. Now, the father of his best friend was just too emotional to go on camera, but he told us what an extraordinary young man Kareem was. But tonight, his former football coach from Episcopal is telling us all of his thoughts about Kareem. Friday, a community heartbroken by the sudden loss of a young man said goodbye in disbelief. Kareem Badawi was a freshman at the University of Alabama. He went there with Ethan Ott, his best friend and football teammate from Episcopal High in Baton Rouge. They were roommates, pledged Sigma Chi together, and in their first semester made 4.0s together. Kareem loved the gym. Their coach, Travis Bourgeois, says he also loved people.
Why? Innocent people, have to suffer. Especially a guy like Kareem was well liked, not a hurtful bone in his body. He's a very just kind, gentle guy, and well liked. People went to Kareem because he was a positive guy.
New Year's Eve night, a bunch of 2024 graduates from Episcopal decided to celebrate together, reunite, and share stories of their first semester in college. At times, the crews got separated. At 3:16 a.m., Ethan told Kareem, "We're headed your way to Bourbon Street." Then a terrorist ended the promising life of a young man who already had a job offer in engineering.
He just did what you told him to do, and he's the type of kid, you tell him to do something, you can turn your back because you know it's going to get done.
Against his father's liking, Ethan and a whole bunch of the guys in solidarity with Kareem got tattoos. They simply read KB 1125. Ethan told his dad, "Now I've got Kareem with me forever." Coach is reminding his young men to support each other.
You can't handle this on your own. You know, an adult cannot handle this on his own. You have to lean on each other. You got to lean on our community, teachers, parents, friends.
Another classmate at Kareem's side that night was former Episcopal baseball player Parker Vadrine. He goes to school at Ole Miss. He's in the ICU now. His mother posted today she is hopeful he will recover.
I've been coaching for 30 years, and there's nothing in the coaching manual that tells me how to handle this situation or tells anybody how to handle a situation like this.
Yesterday, Episcopal High had a memorial service, a closed memorial service for Kareem at the school, and I'm told that the chapel was absolutely overflowing with double its capacity. Reporting live from the French Quarter, Meg Farris, WWL, Louisiana.
So guys, what's so important here is that we really start to think before we post, that we pay attention to how our words could be understood or perceived by other people. Guys, I think that story was tragic. And the sad thing is, it took about a week before his story was told while all the other stories were happening. Believe me, I understand and I know that the Muslim community is stigmatized, that Black and brown people don't get treated the same in the media. But this gentleman, Kareem, lived an amazing life, had a huge impact on everyone around him. And I think there's a lesson in that for how we, as a community, should be thinking about this time that we find ourselves in right now. He went out of his way to be known as a hard worker, to be known as trustworthy, to be known as a good friend, and to be there for his friends. We have to be civically engaged. We have to start to be an outreach-oriented community. We have to deal with things as they are and not rely on conspiratorial thinking as a crutch to make ourselves feel better. We have to have strategy, we have to think ahead, and we have to realize that when Muslims advocate for our rights, and this is unique to our community in America, specifically in the United States, I don't see this in any other place where there is a Western Muslim community. Because the First Amendment protects religious identity, us advocating for the rights of our community actually makes everything better for every person in the United States, because it strengthens not just the First Amendment, but the entire Bill of Rights. And we don't understand how precarious the time that we are living in is. We don't understand the forces that are working against our community. And because of that, we have to be very, very careful to not fall into traps and to recognize that it is on us to live up to Islamic values. It is on us to be a community of virtue and to be a community that's principled, so that when we advocate, people know who we are, know what we stand for, know what we stand against, and then embrace us as a community to help fight the rise of white nationalism being combined with Christian nationalism that is a threat to our Constitution and to the way of life that this country promises. God bless you all. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.
Issa. Okay. Issa? Yes. Issa Galloway.
Issa Galloway.
Issa Galloway.
Issa Galloway.
Issa Galloway, convert to Islam, defines the mission.
Kind of a show that will put people on the edge of their seat.
Because it leads to the future, the more sophisticated approach.